have something in mind to speak about, and this week nothing was coming to me very directly, but in my daily reading, along with other things, I'll read through the Psalms and then through the Proverbs, start over again. And I happened to hit the last chapter of Proverbs 31. And so that's what I'd like to spend a few minutes this morning talking about. Proverbs 31 starts off in this way: the words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. The name Lemuel means for God, or dedicated to God. And this man, King Lemuel, was a very fortunate man. He had two very venerable women in his life, his mother and his wife. And the first part of this proverb, speaking just of the whole chapter, it says that it was an oracle his mother taught him. And then the last part is, it starts in verse 10 and says, an excellent wife, or a virtuous woman, who can find. And he speaks about the character of an excellent wife. Some have suggested that Lemuel was actually Solomon. As I read through here, I kind of had my doubts on that, because he's exhorted by his mother not to give his strength to women, and I would say that Solomon probably was fairly distracted in that area, and ultimately we read that it says he loved, the 700 wives and 300 concubines. It says he loved his wives, and then they led him astray. So I'm not sure that he found the excellent wife. Maybe he thought after 1,000 times he'd finally find one, but so it doesn't matter who wrote this, but I was curious, trying to find out, well, who's this Lemuel? Well, it's uncertain. There's no other reference to him, and I think that's probably why, since Solomon did write many proverbs, but to me it doesn't seem to fit him too well. In addition to the very valuable instruction that we can get from this proverb, I think there's some other things that we can get. As a man, we can appreciate the two most influential, typically women that we would have in our lives, our mothers and our wife. And I would stop and say that while this is speaking of a wife, a lot of the virtues and abilities and characteristics of the woman in the latter part of the chapter can apply to anybody. Maybe you don't have a household to take care of, but there are responsibilities that everyone has. There's lots here that would apply. So for us men, I think this ought to prompt us to appreciate the women in our life, our mother, and then our wife more particularly. Most of the Proverbs is about that, and probably we don't express that appreciation enough. And then for the woman, it can produce affirmation, looking at these virtues, and perhaps inspiration about seeking after this kind of character. And then unfortunately, with the wrong perspective, deprecation. I know that a lot of the women read this and think, this is some kind of superwoman. Who could ever measure up to that? And I think looking at it from a proper perspective, hopefully that won't be the case. I think this is something that can be encouraging and affirming, because I don't think there's anybody here that doesn't have a number of these excellent qualities. here that has every single one of these, but I think the point is we see what is within our ability and appreciate God's help and grace in meeting those. So as I said, the first part of the proverb is King Lemuel's mother's oracle that she taught him. So let's read this first section. Verse 1, the words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. What are you doing, my son? What are you doing, son of my womb? What are you doing, son of my vows? I kind of get the impression that this mother is wondering what her son is doing. But what I took from this is she wants him to stop and evaluate himself, assess, what am I doing? Am I doing things that are profitable, that are beneficial, that are right? And I think that's obviously an important thing for us to do as men, is to stop and consider, what are we doing? Are we doing what we ought to be doing? Are we fulfilling our obligation? Are we doing it in a way that honors the Lord? And so that is an important thing, and I would take it that I think from this passage it's clear that she's giving him instruction for his either his present or his future responsibility as a king, as a leader of people. And I think that these things would apply to any kind of leadership in the assembly and even in our homes. And so he continues here, do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy. As I mentioned, that it seems like Solomon was very distracted, and distraction, obsession, preoccupation, these are things that will prevent us from being what we need to be, being someone who could be looked up to as in a role of leadership. And that was Solomon's downfall. In the latter part of this, that verse, number 3, your ways to those who destroy kings. I'm not sure entirely if that's, following the ways of those who want to undermine and supplant, or if it's allowing those kind of people to see your ways and understand your ways and make you susceptible to their schemes. But in either case, there are things to be avoided, the kind of company that we would keep, or what we might expose to others that could be a harm to us. And then in verses 4 through 7, it's presented a higher standard of behavior and how we could be influenced by the external. So verse 4 says, she says, it is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, for rulers to take strong drink, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to the one who is perishing, wine to those who are in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. And so here, and I think you could probably apply other things besides just this drink, any kind of influence to allow to impact us. But there are effects from this. To forget what is decreed, to set aside the truth that we would know, and also to pervert justice. When somebody is under the influence of a substance like alcohol, their judgment is impaired. They they're not clear thinking. We read about in the New Testament about being sober-minded, and that is the idea of clear and right thinking. There's a verse in Isaiah 52 that I thought was very applicable here. It's a warning. It says, "Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine and valiant men in mixing strong drink, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of his right." So there is a danger in that regard. And then just to put a New Testament perspective on it, Ephesians 5:18 says, "And do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit." And so to use alcohol in excess, we see that what the dangers are here, and especially for a leader, it's not going to serve well at all. And it actually describes the kind of person that should. Someone who's perishing, someone who's in bitter distress. And so to imbibe is kind of like taking this kind of stance of somebody who's in misery or in bitter distress. And that's, my subject is not about alcohol, but it's very clear from the scriptures that excessive use of it is a very dangerous thing. And then the next section, next two verses 8 and 9, the last of this oracle, are about speaking out, opening your mouth. He says in verse 8, "Open your mouth for the mute, for the right of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy." And so it's not only important to keep in mind the decrees, to avoid things that will bring down your leadership or be disparaging towards it, and engage in things that will limit you. But here we read about speaking out for those that can, speaking for those that have no voice, and defending the rights of those that have no power. And so as you read through the Psalms and Proverbs, I think that's something that really stands out, is God's care for those that are not able to defend themselves, for those that are poor, and so on. And so this oracle ends with this as well. Whoever King Lemuel was, if he followed all of this advice, I think he was probably a very good and capable leader and king. And then the second part of this chapter is not his mother speaking to him, but he's speaking of it himself. An excellent wife who can find. So here Lemuel describes the character and works of an excellent wife, or in the King James, a virtuous woman. To put a proper expectation on this, look at verse 29. It says, "Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all." So if you were trying to measure yourself against every aspect of this chapter, you might find it discouraging or depressing. But here, what he's describing here, he addresses to an individual. You have surpassed them all. So this is an extremely remarkable woman, and I think if you can pick a few things out that could describe you, then that is a good thing, and I think you should take encouragement from that. But due to propensity, disposition, physical ability, stamina, and so on, it's very unlikely that anybody here excels at every single aspect that we see in this discourse. But I am confident that there is numerous things here that the women here could be described as. And towards the end of the chapter here, it says, he references that a woman who fears the Lord. I think a woman who fears the Lord is going to be characterized by at least some of these virtues. And I think it's interesting that at the end he mentions that this excellent wife that apparently he found was a woman who fears the Lord. And that is probably why she was able to do these things. So in this section we see a woman with the virtue of, well, we see her values spoken of. She is trustworthy, dependable, provides support and care and provision and foresight and insight and wisdom, and is industrious and shows charity and kindness and gives instruction and even style and refinement. So let's look at this latter half, read through it from verse 10. An excellent wife who can find, she is far more precious than jewels. So she is not equal to gold or silver or even a jewel, but it says here precious jewels. Really, I think it's the idea of unquantifiable value. And verse 11 says, the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. Trust is a very important and valuable thing. And if trust is lost, it's very difficult to regain that. And I can't imagine being in a relationship where you did not trust fully your spouse. A very important thing. And she, it says, the heart of her husband trusts in her. Verse 12, she does him good and not harm all the days of her life. Similarly, I can't even say it. Get the idea. That here's a woman that is always doing good and not harm. A relationship where there's conflict, where there's undermining, where there's trying to get a leg up, maybe gain more power in the relationship, is a very unfortunate thing. But here, the character of this woman, it is in her mind, it says she does him good. Not does good for him. It says she does him good. It's in her mind his interests and growth and everything, reputation, everything is her objective. 13, she seeks wool and flaxen and works with willing hands. There's quite a bit in here about this woman providing for her household and her industry. And so, whether it's food or whether it's clothing, whether it's security for the future, we see her busy at work with this. She seeks wool and flaxen and works willingly, or works with willing hands. And that's another thing I think it points out, willing hands. For somebody that's, gets the job done but is, complains about it all the time, that's not a very positive environment. This is a woman who is willing to serve her family and provide for her family. So she is like ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. In our case, it's probably from Sam's or Aldi or Walmart or whatever. But she makes sure that there is food available for her to sustain her family. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maids. We see later on, too, that she's working into the evening. Must have had a lot of stamina. And again, this is probably in reference to a younger woman rather than somebody who is on the other end of the spectrum. As we get old, we start losing some of that energy. But that's how she's described here. 16, she considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. There's forethought and foresight in this woman. She sees opportunities and takes advantages of them, again, in view of providing for her family. 17, she dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. And I don't think that's necessarily, that she's a bodybuilder and has big muscles. But she is a strong woman to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff and her hands hold the spindle, again referring back to that wool and flaxen that she had sought out, and she is providing clothes for her family. And verse 20 says, she opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. You'd think a woman that was this busy would be pretty focused on just her own activities, her own family. She's providing for their needs, and yet it shows that she has compassion and empathy for those in need, and she opens her hand for those in need. She reaches out her hands to the needy. Verse 21, she is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. The marginal reading there for scarlet says thickness, double thickness, I think it was. Appropriate clothing to meet the needs of the current environment. In the wintertime, her family isn't shivering, but she has provided the appropriate clothes for them. But look at verse 22. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. We are familiar with the expression, a woman's touch. And Eleanor and I have been working on our son Andrew's house, in which 3, then 2, then 1 bachelor lived there. And I can guarantee you there's not much refinement or style in the decoration of that home. It makes a big difference in a home. That's not something that, as men, we would typically be very focused on. If we were living by ourselves, it would probably be fairly spartan. But a woman is able to make a home a more welcome, pleasant, peaceful, calm sort of environment for us to retire to. So maybe that's not something we think that often of as being, a virtue or a positive character, but that is what a woman brings, is style and refinement. 23 says, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Also another expression behind every good man is a good woman. There's a lot of truth to that. Because of what she is accomplishing with the family, the security that she provides, the additional income, and all of these different things give him the opportunity to fulfill a role that otherwise he might not be able to do. Or if things were falling apart at home, that would not be a very good testimony in regard to him as to how his household was being governed. He might not be given recognition as he sat in the gates. Verse 24, she makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. industrious person, but she is contributing. I'm not sure what, I guess King Lemuel was busy as a king, but she certainly provided and added to the security of the household in the things that she occupied her time with. Strength and dignity are her clothing. She laughs at the time to come. She is prepared for the future. She has provided security for her household. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. So she passes on, no doubt, providing wisdom to her husband as well, but also she teaches her children kindness and passes on the excellent character that she has. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Now the last few verses here are verses that give her recognition. It says, her children rise up and call her blessed. If you're a younger mother here today, you might have to wait a little while until you're no longer stupid and out of touch. And then when your kids are older, they will recognize all that you have done and the wisdom that you passed on. But this woman is marked by that, a virtuous woman, that her children will rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. And I think this is an exhortation to those of us that are men and husbands to give that recognition. And I see my wife's probably busy down putting a meal together right now. And I would confess I am very lax in expressing praise for all the virtue that my wife has, but I can acknowledge that here publicly and appreciate all that she does and everything I can depend upon her for. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. I was kind of thinking here, as husbands, I'm pretty sure that all of us wouldn't trade the wife that God gave us for anybody else. We might see somebody that has some great abilities. Well, that would be nice, but I doubt any of us would be willing to make the trade. And then verse 30, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. A woman can be charmful and she can be beautiful. That is not a negative thing, but if that is all her attributes, then that is not, it says that's really vain. It's empty. It doesn't produce what we have read about here. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And I think that's kind of a key to all of these attributes that we've been reading about, is that a woman who fears the Lord, depends upon the Lord. God will give the ability to take care of a household effectively, productively. And again, there's probably things in here that you as a woman you might look at and say, well, that's just, I couldn't do that. That's not, I'm not an entrepreneur, or I can't get up that early in the morning, or I can't stay up that late at night. And again, the point is that there are certainly things within this chapter that are true of you, and you can appreciate God's grace in giving you those abilities and carrying out those abilities. It ends here saying, give her the fruit of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. It is this kind of virtue is seen and recognized. Its value is appreciated even outside of the family. But you can see that Lemuel considered the wife that he had, and he, in his opinion, she was more excellent than all the rest. I hope that we can have that kind of opinion of our own wives as well. And, hopefully there's some encouragement, perhaps inspiration. There's always room for improvement in certain ways. Husbands, I highly recommend you don't point those out, and that might not be the best idea. But trust that maybe this is a blessing in reading God's Word on the subject. So let's pray. Our Father, we're thankful for all of your blessings to us. We think of the divine order that you established, even in a family relationship, a husband and wife, and raising up a family. And we're thankful for the virtues that we see expressed in this chapter, these words of Lemuel. And we're thankful for those who fear the Lord, and in so doing desire to honor and obey you, and in so doing that could be described as virtuous, providing the care, the compassion, the wisdom, all of these different characteristics that could be true. And so we just ask for your blessing upon this time together, and we are thankful for the food that is prepared for us for